There you go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Hello everybody, welcome to another GrantTree Fundamentals. Today we're going to talk about workflow. I'd like to begin by checking in. I've had too much coffee today accidentally while I've been working on this presentation, so I feel a bit weird. I don't know how that's going to affect it. I'll try and not let that affect me. I'm also a bit nervous and apprehensive about this presentation because it's a kind of whole new area of stuff. There's a bit of a departure from the stuff that we've been talking about in GrantTree Fundamentals so far. It's proposing a kind of new area of work that's going to involve, you know, everybody to some degree. So I don't know how that's going to go down, but yeah, I'm gonna give it a go. I'm in. So, I've talked before about what is open culture, and I said there are these kind of two things. It's about how we are with each other, and it's about how we do the work. And obviously what we've been talking about a lot today in GrantTree Fundamentals, and when we kind of talk about open culture, is really we've focused more on the how we are with each other, and less on the how we do the work. And today I kind of want to start thinking about what the how we do the work piece looks like. But in order to help us understand what that is, I just want to turn back for a bit and think about what's kind of happened so far and what the how we are with each other piece of work looks like. Yeah, everything is structure, right? And there are internal structures and there are external structures. So in terms of what we've been doing, and there's a saying which is culture follows structure. Okay, what is a structure? A structure is anything that you have that tells you how you want to behave, right? Anything that kind of constrains your behavior. So, a tattoo is a structure, something that you put there to say, this is the thing that I want to remind myself of. It happened to me in the past. This is the way that I want to be. I want to remind myself of. Similarly, all of the stuff which we've developed, like the advice process, that's a structure. And some of those structures are knowledge and skills and thoughts and beliefs and habits and actions, that's the internal stuff. And some of them are tools and processes and things like that, right? That's the external stuff. And there's a principle in culture, there's a principle in kind of cultural change, which is that culture follows structure. So if you put the right structures in place, you promote the behaviors that we want to see and the culture that you kind of want emerges, right? So another way of looking at that, and looking at the kind of structures that we have, is that you start with this piece in the middle, with the stuff that you do formally, the stuff that's very kind of process-driven, and then that in turn starts to drive the way that you are habitually, and so the stuff that you do informally. And the other way, it starts to become knowledge and skills, which you can also get into through explicit training. And knowledge and skills are both personal and common. So personal knowledge and skills, that's the stuff that I have. Common knowledge and skills, that's the stuff that we all have together and that we know that we all have together. That's quite an important concept. So I just want to take a pause there and just refresh that and say it again, which is that common knowledge, there's a concept here of common knowledge, which is the knowledge which I have and you have. And I know that you have it, and you know that I have it, right? So that it's as if we've got like a shared mind about this stuff. And achieving common knowledge is an important part of effective collaboration. So part of what we're doing, for instance with GrantTree Fundamentals, right, is we're building some common knowledge about how we're going to operate as a business, so that we know, oh, okay, we can rely on collaborating with each other in certain ways without having to have a conversation about it, because we know that there are some kind of rules about how we're going to do things. So, thinking about the stuff that we have so far and kind of how it fits in, the how we are piece, like things up here in the skills knowledge, this is stuff like, MVC, or, other aspects of kind of non-violent communication or compassionate communication. Stuff we do formally is the processes we have, like the advice process or the sort of focused mentoring process. And the stuff we do informally is, this is more what people think of as culture. It's just kind of how we are with each other day to day. And the stuff that we do formally does influence the stuff that we do informally, right? We set up these structures, like the advice process, like focused mentoring, that promote certain behaviors, that drive us to build certain knowledge and skills. And that means that the way that we are with each other casually on a day-to-day basis in the kitchen, around the water cooler, talking about a particular client handing over a piece of work starts to change, and that's where we get like the real stuff of open culture happening. Okay, so this is a framework for thinking about what makes up culture. And I said at the start that there are kind of two bits of open culture: the how we are and the how we do the work. So what that means is we've kind of got the same thing repeated. We built these structures, we built this knowledge, these skills, the practices that we have around how we are with each other. There's a whole new area, which is at least as large, that is an important part of open culture that we, of self-management, that we need to start engaging with. And it's the stuff around how we do the work. This is a legitimate question. Why do we need to start engaging with this? Why do we need this whole other area of stuff? There's nothing else to this slide, by the way. There's just a question why. Sometimes just asking the question why is the most important, powerful thing that you can do. You don't need to do anything else. So I thought I might just leave it like that. There are a couple of reasons why we need to do this. The first is it happens anyway. Right? We already have ways in which we engage with the work and with the workflow. And the question is it something that's on the surface, that's object, that we can operate on, that we have choice over, that we can say, oh, let's do it this way, that way, that's explicit and in front of us and that we can talk about? Or is it something that's happening anyway, but we can't see it and that we're subject to and it pushes us around? One of the themes of open culture is obviously the moving of stuff from the shadow to the surface, right? So we talk about the check-in protocol, right? You name your emotions. You say, oh, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling nervous today, or I've had too much coffee, or whatever it is, because then it's out there, and it's not something that you're being pushed around by, right? That's surfacing stuff. This is a quote from one of the from my notes from one of the consulting sessions that we had with Versus earlier in the year. And I think this is great, right? This is advice that we paid for, so let's put it up there and use it. Most organizations don't know how they make decisions or how they're run, so they make stuff up to fill the gap. This is the thing that we do as human beings. Where there are gaps, we fill them, and we fill them in subconscious processes. We don't know that we're making stuff up. And the danger that happens, and this comes back to the concept of common knowledge and why it's important, is we might say, well, why do we need to do any work on the workflow? Why do we need to, visualize, let's say, the tax credit workflow? We all know what it is. Okay, well, we all know what it is, but do we all have common knowledge? Or do we all have our own version, which may be different to other people's? And it's that difference where I have a view of how this is done and you have a view, and that means our expectations of each other, of what we're going to do, and the work that we're going to output is different. And that leads us to, systemic conflict, situations where we disappoint each other and we send blame and things that we can avoid. So we make stuff up to fill gaps whether we know we're doing it or not. And also, what we make up may be dysfunctional. By bringing things to the surface, we have more of an opportunity to say, is what we're doing working for us? Do we want to do it this way? Could we do it better? Another way of looking at this is, this has got arrows going both ways, which is maybe a bit misleading. We could say that we're moving stuff from shadow to surface. And actually that's kind of what coaching is. So that's kind of what GrantTree Fundamentals is. It's about moving stuff from shadow to surface, right? So there's a kind of meta quality to this, of revealing the system to itself. But okay, back to the question of why, right? So I've said one of the reasons why we need to engage with this is because it's happening anyway. So we might as well move it to somewhere where it's something that we can operate on. But there are lots of things that are happening anyway. Why is this such an important dimension for us to be able to work on? I think there are a whole load of reasons for this. Let's do them one at a time. The first is efficiency. Right? By bringing the workflow to the surface and starting to look at it and to change it and modify it, we can make efficiency savings. So there's a bottom line reason for doing this piece of work. The second reason is we are increasing our ability to self-manage by moving from just operating, just self-managing at the level of to self-managing at the level of workflow. So workflow is, and this is a definition from Wikipedia, why not? Orchestrated and repeatable pattern of business activity enabled by the systematic organization of resources into processes. Right, so in other words, it's about saying that we do two things here by engaging with this in the self-management. We expand our locus of control from saying, I'm self-managing in the sense that all the work that's in front of me, I'm in charge of, how I prioritize and do it, to saying, I'm also in charge of how the work comes to me in the first place, right? So that's one way of looking at workflow. The other way in which we expand our ability to, there are two senses in which having control over the workflow rather than just control over the work increases our self-management. And I find this hard to separate them, but the first is I have the opportunity to, if I'm doing this, if I have control over my workflow and not just my work, then I have more opportunity to design and manage and change and adapt the business going forward, right? So I'm more in control of the business as a whole. But also I have more of an opportunity by surfacing the workflow to choose pieces of work and to move from a more push paradigm to a more pull paradigm. Right? The traditional top-down paradigm of work is that work is pushed to you by somebody higher up the tree or whatever, and it's more self-managing to say that the work is out there and you can see it and you have the opportunity to go and select it and pull it towards you. Okay, so efficiency, self-management. The third reason, an adaptive workflow. So traditionally what happens in organizations is processes are designed and they're put in place, and then they sort of don't change, right? You keep following that process again and again and again. There's some crisis and it has to be updated. But the world is changing all the time, and one of the wonderful things about self-management and self-organizing businesses is that we're able to adapt to the way in which the world is changing around us, right? Think about tax credit disruption and what we're saying, we might start doing this work in this way and that way. And we should have the freedom and the flexibility to change our workflow all the time to reflect the changing environment, which gives us that ability to start incorporating approaches to work and start responding to factors that we didn't necessarily anticipate at the point at which we initially designed it, right? So skilling everybody in the ability to know what the workflow is and to talk about it and to make it more efficient allows us to be more adaptable. There are also secondary structures which follow on from the workflow. For me, the most important of these is how do we formalize our commitments? Right, we sort of said earlier in the year, we're going to start using Holarchy as a way of kind of formalizing our accountabilities, formalizing the work that we're committed to. But we're not really using that at all, right? It doesn't seem to be a tool that's actually working for us. Now, I suggest the reason that we're not using it and the reason it's a tool that's not working for us is because we're trying to we're going about it like, cart before the horse, right? The important thing is to say, what's the structure of the work? What are the needs of the work? What's the process there? Because that defines the shape of the commitments that we need to make. And then the system that we put in place to hold those commitments follows the shape of the commitments, follows the shape of the work. So I think that, and I believe that we need a system for formalizing our system, for formalizing the commitments that we make. Because if we don't have that, we come back to this implicit, explicit, shadow surface thing, which is that I don't know what work you're committed to. You don't know what work I'm committed to. So how do we hold each other accountable? We go back into that thing of if it's not made explicit, we make it up. And then we start to have expectations of what other people are going to be doing, which aren't necessarily the expectations that they have. Which ties into the final reason why I think it's important to do this stuff on the workflow, is because we can see surface issues for shadow problems. So the absolute classic example in GrantTree of this is flexible working, particularly working from home, right? If you say, I can't do my work if you're working from home, right? Well, what's that really about? What's going on there? I mean, it's the stuff that a lot of us think and feel, right? And that's totally legitimate that we think and feel that way, but what does that represent? Where's it coming from? I would suggest that if you're saying, I don't trust that you're working unless I see you working, that's a problem. right? Because actually we should move to because it's not efficient, it's not self-managing, it's very restrictive to say that I have to see working. To me, it's better if we can say, if I see the outputs of your work that you've committed to, and I see those happening, and I see those being produced at the point at which I need them, then I know that you're working. It doesn't matter to me whether you do them in the middle of the night, or on the other side of the world, or in Southeast London in your pajamas. It's not important, as long as the outputs that I need to work on from you, so the things that are my inputs but your outputs, I get when I need. So it gives us more of an opportunity to say, oh, okay, these people are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. And thinking about surface issues and shadow problems, if you think about an iceberg, the classic kind of visual metaphor of PowerPoint presentations, the iceberg, an iceberg can have several peaks, right? Because it's kind of jaggedy at the top. Now, depending on where the waterline is, you might see one kind of like that, but if you raise the waterline up a bit, you might see what seem like a whole series of separate problems that are actually just the sort of surface symptoms of a deeper issue. And one of the things that Stephen Kuhn has said to us a couple of times over the course of this year is we observe what in our experience as system coaches are the surface symptoms of a business that has a shadow problem with its workflow. So they're like, you need to do some work on your workflow. So those to me are a whole load of compelling reasons why I think that we should begin to have a practice of servicing our workflow, building up the knowledge, the skills, the formal processes to work on that, and then in turn, this becoming an informal and habitual part of our work. There are some specific things which we should do, I think, as part of this work. And again, this is a recommendation that we've had from Versus on the basis of the consulting that they've done with us, both the kind of sessions that we've had with Steve Kuhn, but then the time that Steve came in and worked with Daisy and kind of observed our work. These are their recommendations to us. And obviously this is very much up for discussion, but it's stuff that we need to collaborate on as a team. It's not stuff that I can kind of go away and do on my own. So, the first thing is to visualize the workflow. Right, and obviously there's a Jeff's diagram on the board over there, which is the way that might be done. And we've kind of, I feel like visualizing the workflow is stuff that we've kind of talked about a lot and we have an idea about doing. And it's really just a thing that we just need to push over the finish line. And for me, there are lots of good reasons why we want to visualize this. And it's completely legitimate that people say, well, this kind of already is visualized in different places in Asana or Guardian or whatever. But I think that a Kanban-like thing, a simple visual tool that everybody can see, has a couple of key advantages. The first is putting something up and out there like this, like the kind of, like Grant's chart that's on that wall, is a way of saying, hey, to everybody, this is the core work of the business, this is the gemba of the business, this is where we make our money. Right, it's important, let's see it. Let's actually have it front and center physically in the space so that everybody has eyes on it. That's good because it creates a respect for that work. But it also does those two things that I mentioned earlier around self-management. It allows everybody to see what the workflow is and therefore to decide where do we need to make changes to our processes. But it also allows everyone to see where the workflow is and therefore make more informed decisions about the work that they are going to pull out of it and do. So following on from the visualization, there are some things that we can do. The first of those is to review the tools that we use. We have a lot of, and this is all kind of focused on the tax credit delivery team, by the way, just because we have to start this work somewhere. But hopefully by bringing in this practice and these knowledge and these skills, we can spread it out across the whole business. But yeah, this is a starting point. So we have a lot of tools in tax credit delivery where there seem to be kind of overlap, Guardian and Asana and also spreadsheets and, information in lots of places. It may be worth asking, how can we simplify that? How can we streamline that? Once we're looking at the workflow, we might say, actually, what do we really need from these tools? Which buttons do we need and which don't we? Which represent points where work is handed over and which don't. Right? So that's one thing that we can look at. Another is queues. There's some theory around workflow design about the efficient management of queues. So for instance, one of the specific bits of feedback that Steve has given us is at the moment, for writers, for tech narratives on tax credit claims, each writer has their own queue, and we manage who gets which pieces of work. There is a thing in the academic study around workflows that actually says that's not an efficient way to make a queue. If you have multiple people who are fulfilling the same role, and there is a volume of work that needs to be surfaced, it is more efficient to maintain a single queue for all of the people doing the same role, rather than maintain multiple queues. Various reasons for that, which we can explore later on. And there may be other queues in the business that we can handle more efficiently. This is linked to bottlenecks. One of the really interesting things about workflow design is this slightly counterintuitive stuff, which comes from this work by Eliyahu Goldratt, whose his book The Goal, which is a sort of business textbook in the form of a novel. There are some counterintuitive truths around how you handle efficiency it's originally designed for manufacturing, but how you handle efficiency in multi-stage processes. And we kind of have like a multi-stage assembly process in tax credits, that claims are built up stage by stage. There are some slightly counterintuitive truths which originally come from fluid dynamics about the way in which those processes work and the way in which you can make them more efficient. And a lot of that is around how you identify and manage bottlenecks. So for instance, one of the truths is every manufacturing process must actually have a bottleneck. Right? So your aim is not to remove every bottleneck, your aim is to identify where the bottleneck is and to balance the capacity of the bottleneck to market demand, and then from there, the non-bottleneck bits that either feed into the bottleneck or feed out of the bottleneck have to be managed so that their flow matches the flow that you need to have through the bottleneck. So there's this stuff called drum, buffer, rope. But there's an interesting bit of learning to do there and to apply. Then there's some stuff around metrics, which again kind of follows on from this, which is about saying there's these two things, cost of delay and throughput accounting, which are ways of looking at the way that the system is functioning financially, which equip people to make better decisions about what's important to work on. So an example here is it should be possible for us to say what is the most valuable piece of work in the tax credits delivery pipeline at any one point in time. And the most valuable piece of work will be the piece of work that is nearest to completion, which has the highest value. There are some ways that you can put simple algorithms on this that help you calculate this, that put numbers so that you can actually say, which piece of work should I do, what's the financial impact of my activities. And finally, a useful practice is retrospectives. Steve recommends that we do this. I think it's a great idea. At the end of a piece of work, or incorporated into circle meetings, to actually say what were the pieces of work that we finished last week, and what can we learn about them? What do we want to do differently next time? So that we begin to have a practice of constantly saying, how is our workflow working for us? What is changing the world? What do we want to A/B test? So that we're making kind of small tweaks as we go, and we have the opportunity to do all of that kind of adaptive stuff. Right, okay. That's it for this week. That's the end of the presentation. I got through it in spite of the too much coffee. A very wordy one this week. So there's a lot that's gone in, maybe feeling a little bit in the headlights of my, assault of workflow or something. But questions and comments, as ever.
So you've kind of identified that we need to start kind of tackling the whole workflow issue. How would you suggest that we start? Because it's all very well saying, yeah, let's do this, but we need to kind of, I guess, put that plan in place.
That's a really good question, and that's kind of why I decided to make this the subject of this presentation, because I was like, these are the things that we need to start with. How do we do this? I can't do it all, and actually, it's more valuable as an activity if the people whose work it is are visual. You know, if it's like if you're the taxpayer delivery team, you're the ones who should be saying this is our workflow. This is how we want to visualize it with my help and support. So my question really is, who wants to get involved in this, and how do they want to do it?
Wouldn't it be the people who are kind of been involved in trying to create efficiencies and saving things, like saving time and the process, improving that within the team? So like Rowan in sales has been very much trying to do these things. You know, Justin now is very much trying to improve and increase efficiencies within the team. So those would be the people that I would say have been actively working on this.
That suggests to me that those are people who are actively... Oh, sorry, did you finish?
Yeah.
Those suggest to me that those are people who are going to be interested in getting involved in this, but I don't think it should just be exclusively for them. And actually, I think, like in terms of the long-term health and success of the organisation as a self-managing business, we want to get to a point at which we don't have, you know, these kind of meta work roles anymore, and that people own their own process and are involved in their own process. So absolutely, those people who have done that thought, it suggests to me that they're people who are going to want to be involved in this and to bring that thought and preparation to it.
But so everybody in this company now has the ability to make like incremental improvements on their work, which I think a lot of people do. People do it in sales. CMs have definitely done it, you know, from day dot. So those improvements definitely do happen, but sometimes it's just good to have core people doing bigger, like making bigger improvements where you can see bigger leaps that individuals just wouldn't have the time to do themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
The projects, basically.
Yeah, somebody might need to take it on and say, yeah, you know, like we're not going to work 10 of us on this piece of thing. It's going to be 2 of us, and we're going to use the advice process, and we're going to go and come to the best solution. But I'm not going to stand here and say, you know, if Mike wants to get involved in that because he hasn't thought about it before, he can't. You know?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great that the fact that everybody knows this now. I just feel it is iterating things that sort of 80% of the company know. I'm a little bit with Jason, which is it's a starting point, and I just feel I'd like to see it go a bit further. I'd just like to know examples of where people are doing it, where it's worked. It's happened organically without this conversation, and I wish this had happened a bit earlier, but I'd like to see sort of like, you know, here's an example of it, this is where it's working, this is how people have done it naturally. That's sort of, I just felt that it was more, that's what I wanted to hear a bit more about.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you know, let me lift the bonnet on this. You know, I do the GrantTree fundamentals presentation on a Thursday morning because that's the time slot that I have available. So I wake up, I have the first cup of coffee, and I have to marshal the thoughts about the topic, and I have basically one pass.
Yeah.
So yeah, I almost always look back on them and think there was more that I wanted to do in there, could have gone into more detail, could have been more interesting, could have been better put together, but this was the way that I managed to marshal those thoughts into coherent order this time. But yeah, it's definitely stuff that's happening already, and as you say, you know, it would be great if we had done this earlier. I don't think there's any piece of work that we're doing, but it wouldn't be great.
We say we want to get eyes on the work, as in, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, this is how we're going to go about it. I think that is really, really important, because one thing we've spoken about in the meetings, which was that culture is supposed to support what we're trying to achieve as a product. And I'd probably say it's not the bottleneck, but it can be a bottleneck. Sometimes culture is a bottleneck.
Okay, well, in this sense, that's not true, because bottleneck here is like a technical term, and it has to be a stage in the process, a stage of work in the assembly of the finished piece.
What happens if seeking advice, which is a stage possibly in decision making, becomes a hindrance and a chore, and you're ending up in debates and arguing with people? That would be the definite bottleneck. Sure.
Okay, but again, it's not a bottleneck in the sense of workflow design, because that's not part of the workflow. That's not a stage of the assembly of the work. There is actually because the seeking of advice and the kind of cultural stuff in that sense comes into the other half of the culture, which is the how we are with each other, the kind of, you know, the how we interact. Because I'm always open to discuss whether we can do that better, and whether the way that we're doing it now might be obstructive. I don't believe that the process of going and seeking advice is obstructive. I don't believe.
I'm just wondering, because with where we are with workflow, if there are things have already been happening that are addressing some of this stuff, is there not, I mean, it's not even really a question, but I'm just kind of wondering, as a next step, maybe an extension of this presentation or kind of falling out into taking action on what is being presented here and what's happening already within the business. Maybe this should just actually be, I don't know, not should be, but is there a possibility for people who are doing work to see how this applies to work that they're actually already doing and then to reconvene on this? It's, at the moment, this is like, okay, this is things that we need to do. Already pointed out, there's some stuff already being done. So now the next step probably, I see it as to bring the two together. With that.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a bit kind of like, it's hard to have. I don't see,
Yeah, no, I agree completely. You're absolutely right. Right, that is the next step. And to pick up on Don's point that this kind of stuff is already happening and this knowledge is in places and it's like, yeah, absolutely. Part of the process or part of the point of having these weekly sessions is that this is about it's about common knowledge. This is about saying are we all on the same page of what we're doing here and why we're doing it, and so that the work that different people are doing becomes a coherent whole, rather than there being big variations in understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So yeah, there is definitely, like, this is if you remember whenever it was the start of season 2 of GrantTree Fundamentals, when we just said, okay, here's this concept of non-violence. There's no outcome, there's no structure. It's just a thing where we kind of all need to be on the same page, because the presentations that come in the sessions that come in the following weeks are going to draw on this. This is what this is. This is a bedrock for saying, okay, let's start going into, what is the science of bottlenecks? What is a drum buffer rip? How does that work? Let's get some knowledge shared about that. Please.
So just in terms of like the specifics, like, can we use like, or I don't know if Steve and Kieran are like, queuing theory experts or how much stuff you know about, but there is definitely like, if we do have specific problems, there's ones that I know have existed for a while. One of them is how to prioritise things in a sales pipeline and stuff like that. And we do know bits of it, but we could always be better. I would like to kind of talk to somebody with a better specific problem and ask kind of specific solutions. And do you think, is there anyone, how's the best kind of, I don't know if there's any kind of queuing theory gurus here, but basically, is there a way in all this to kind of actually go and bring the specific problems elsewhere? I mean, in terms of if we feel like this stuff has been happening for a long time, but we haven't quite got to the bottom of it. I know I can think of a few examples in the process, but so maybe is that something that those guys can help with as well? Or?
Yes.
Okay, so can I bring a specific problem?
Yeah. I think we have a monthly consulting session with Versus. There are coaches as a business, so they're there to kind of help us understand and achieve our aims. And it seems to me like we've done a load of really good work on the kind of how we are with each other piece. That we've got like the advice process working well. We've got feedback kind of working well. I mean, it's still a work in progress, but it feels to me like we've made leaps and bounds. Okay, so we can just let that start to develop naturally for a bit and then focus our accelerated development on this. So for me, this is the growth area of the business. This is where our development is focused, and therefore it's the right thing to use our monthly time with Versus to work on this, and to use those sessions to support us in developing knowledge and skills, so that they can say, yeah, I can advise you on that specific problem, and I can point you to the reading, which means that in future you will be able to have knowledge as a business to solve this more for yourself, in the same way that we have done with, the kind of how we are with each other stuff. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, just like to get a little bit of time.
Cool. Noted.
So just one thing, so it's sort of something that Rowan just said, and made me think about his presentation, is this is sort of a current problem, and it's been happening, and it's something that we've all been trying to solve and things like that. And we find like now we're getting the answer to it, but a lot of us have stumbled across the answer, we've been trying to build things. Instead of just presenting this, which is a very current thing, and we came upon this problem as a company, we've then been trying to solve it, we're getting there, and now we're getting the answer. I feel it's a little bit after the horse has bolted. What I'd like to see is like, okay, this is part, this is what we're trying to sort out now, and we appreciate the problem. The next thing in the pipeline is this. What I don't have is the next piece of this. As in, once we've got this done, what happens next? And I don't need the whole thing, but I'd like to have that sort of foresight, or at least be, preparing things or having an understanding of that sort of level of the journey. And I feel what we're doing is, we've not got that sort of map yet. We've just got, right, this is what's happening currently. You all know it's happening. I'll describe it to you. Okay, then what we're going to do, we're all going to get in the middle of the next problem, and then you're going to describe that to us. I sort of want a bit more about, or do we not know this? Do we not know this list of problems, or do we not know what's going to happen next? Or?
I'm struggling a little bit.
Well, I sort of feel that Q and those guys they must have an understanding of, like, once they solve this problem, what tends to be the next thing that comes up. And I feel that would be more useful than anything. Because that gives us an idea of where we're heading, as opposed to what we do currently know where we're having problems.
Okay. I mean, to me, to crack these things, to really sort of crack these things is going to take us 6 months.
But what happens, say, if we all really apply ourselves into this fall? Give people the tools, and they'll do it, but they can keep it in their mind. They can start thinking about it, reading about it, starting to learn, make habits. Don't sort of manage what you feed to people. Let's give it to them and sort of see what happens.
But we've talked about this before, Don, in these meetings. The part of the point of fundamentals is about ensuring that everybody's got that same.
Yeah.
Basically, you're saying everybody's aware that stuff happens, but not everybody is aware quite of kind of what's going on in different bits of the business, and this is like the kind of baseline of that, And it's,
but don't hold the intelligent kids back then. In that case.
Okay, but if that's how you feel, if what you said before, if that's not useful, then this is about making sure that everybody's got the same tools.
Yeah, and I'm not saying detract the same. What you're presuming, I'm saying get rid of that information. Let's have that so everybody's up to speed, but then give a bit more education as well, so that people are getting up to speed, but then we know what's coming next, so we can start looking for the next thing.
But on that, on that though, I don't. It doesn't feel. You've been here as long as me. It doesn't feel reasonable to say actually the thing you're going to do in 4 months' time is likely to be X, because what will happen in 3.5 months' time. The world will just look completely different.
But maybe that's the case. But I just feel we're sort of going from problem to problem, just like a bit more.
I think the thing is
without jumping into this conversation, I just like to say I'm supposed to know about this stuff. I found this presentation quite information dense, quite difficult to take in. Actually, I was going to comment to Andrew privately afterwards that it was a little bit abstract and like there was a lot of information to take in for one presentation, and I learned a whole bunch of stuff in this presentation. So I feel like, as somebody who is supposed to know about this workflow design, I learned a lot in this presentation. My impression is that, maybe I'm not one of the intelligent kids, but I needed this to catch up on where Andrew's at with this.
I
That's what I
agree.
want to say.
Seeing it together is helpful and brings even your own thoughts, kind of puts one on that.
John, you and I were in the last consulting session on Versus, so maybe you have a subconscious bias happening where you think that people know as much about it, know more about this than they do, because you know quite a lot about this, so it's very familiar to you. And yes, Daniel, it was a very information-dense presentation, but sort of there's a thing here between both of your comments, which is this is knowledge that has been in my head in more or less this sort of level of detail for, let's say 6 weeks or something, and I've been sitting around thinking, oh God, this needs to move forward, like I can't do it on my own, and there just comes a point at which you just have to do a really information-dense presentation and just go, sorry everybody, and just kind of shove it at you all.
I think that is the perfect reaction. You holding on to it isn't helping the room full of people. You dumping it, and then even if you open yourself up to questions or reflections or anything like that, you holding on to it is the problem, not a problem. You know what I mean? It's like that's the worst thing you can do.
No, I agree completely. Which is why here it is. But I can only do one of these a week because I have other stuff to do and you've got other stuff to do as well. And there have been other topics that we've needed to work through, and I didn't do one last week because I was ill, and it does create a delay. I also hear what you're saying in terms of what's going to be the next thing over the horizon. Can we start thinking about that? Do you know, the truth is, I don't know. And actually, to me, one of the things about, maybe it's a personal thing that I'm projecting, or maybe it really is a thing about kind of teal open culture, is that it is quite a responsive way of doing things, that we don't necessarily know, what are going to be the next 3 steps, where are we going to be, 6 months from now, what problem specifically are we going to be working on in a year, but rather, because for me one of the things about the kind of teal open culture paradigm is that it embraces the fact that, in the words of Weddy, the process is the win. Right? So the point is that we don't necessarily know we're going to do this, and then the next step after that is going to be this, and it's going to be a nice linear map that I can lay out for you. Instead, I can say, okay, well, this is where we are now, this is what the destination looks like, this is the process that we're going to follow to get there, and the more we are making that process happen, the more we actually don't need to know the next thing, because we're equipping ourselves to be reactive in an effective way. If you want an instinct, though, about what the next thing is going to be when we finish this, it will be more stuff on workflow, or more stuff on how we are with each other, or it will be a sense that actually these things are settled. There is I wish I don't have a whiteboard here. There is an extent at the moment at which I think it can sometimes feel like we've got this pocket of stuff that we have to do on the culture, and we've got this pocket of stuff that we have to do for clients, and then we've got this thing over here which is I've got to do this stuff around pay, and this thing over here which is we have to build some finance processes, and this thing, and they all seem very separate. One of the things that I think is happening is that these things, we're starting to understand that these things are actually all linked, and they're coming to meet each other. So, the stuff like, this is the focused mentoring process. This is why when things aren't working out, we do things in this way. Creates a structure which holds a set of behaviours. Those behaviours start to become informal and habitual, and they start to affect the way that we are in the work, and then suddenly it becomes easier for us to say, let's disrupt actually that it's going to be easy for us to completely change the way we do things every day of the week without it becoming terrifying, because we're changing our meta emotion, we're changing the way that we respond to and feel about change. We're building the skills to be able to be in effective, creative conflict with each other, and to speak honestly and to collaborate. And suddenly all of these things that seem separate start to come together, and then the beating heart of the business is really starting to pulse. And we have that feeling, that kind of Visa organization-like feeling of GrantTree being a thing that is alive, right, that has a consciousness, because that's what an adaptive organization is. It's one that is learning, and we have that common knowledge, that kind of hive mind that fits us to survive in the ever more complex world that we live in, where information flows ever faster and faster, and the world becomes exponentially more complex. If you want the long-term vision, that's what I think.
I'm sort of working on similar sort of stuff, and obviously this stuff will be helpful, and my own knowledge as well as obviously there's some overlap. In terms of accessing all of this research, what is the best way to sort of get at it? Is it going to be sort of on the hub somewhere, or is it best to speak to you, or what do you want to sort of know what I'm working on to then figure out what's best to? I guess the tricky thing with GrantTree, not just with this stuff, but is accessing information. Obviously, we don't want this to be wasted, do we?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of like how much depth of information there is behind this, it's quite shallow, right? This is a very information-dense presentation, and I've kind of given you almost everything that I know. I know a bit more about bottlenecks, and a little bit more kind of here and here, but actually, like I have pointers of areas to go away and learn. And there are options, which is that I go away and learn that stuff and I bring it back. But if other people like you, Justin, are really interested and involved in this work, it might make sense for you to be the one who goes away and learns it and brings the stuff back. How we incorporate this and find time for this and work together on this in the midst of everything else that we're trying to do, that's a challenge that I don't have the answer for, and it's a challenge that I request that we work on together, because it needs to work for all of us. But yes, definitely an action coming out of this is that you and I should sit down and have a cup of, well, not coffee, certainly not today, but or tea or something.
So I guess just to kind of figure out how the next step, would it be to try and map what we like a first draft of the workflow, like from sales all the way through to invoicing, right? Like get a first draft, and then we can kind of go into the details of each of those.
Yeah, there's stuff already up which Jeff's done. There's obviously, we already have the existing work that was done in Guardian 1 of kind of chopping the workflow up into the basic stages. Although one of the things that came up with Steve when he came in to have Daisy take us through the workflow is just some of those stage boundaries are not necessarily very clear, and actually surfacing the fact that there's fuzziness around some of those stage boundaries is really useful. But yeah, understanding. And if you remember, one of the pieces of advice that Global Tolerance gave us going into the purpose workshop was one of the things about a really effective purpose is getting the balance between too broad and too narrow. Right? If it's too narrow, then you just have this really long, really detailed purpose that goes on and on and on and on and on to a side of A4. It's useless. Too broad, and it could apply to anybody. You've got to get that kind of sweet spot. It's the same stuff with thinking about the workflow and how you visualize it. How many stages you want. You want them to be, broad enough, but not too broad. And for me, there are some things to think about in the way that we do that, which are, one of the things that we want to come out of this is to say, where are the points at which, there is an output? Where are there actual points at which a work could be put down and handed over, in the most efficient way? So, yeah.
I think on the visualization stuff, it's great to see all this together, but I think as a kind of testament to the way that we're getting better and better at working together, I think visualization thing that's on the board that Jeff drew, half done, the other half on the left, it all comes from a combined piece of work that Greeny's done in terms of Guardian, work that I've done, Robin's done.
Yeah.
So there's it's coming from all over the business, and I think that's really close to being kind of there. So it is just, know that there are all these things there, but it's testament that it is happening as well. And it would be great to now to acknowledge that it is something that we really think is important, to just push that extra step and get it there, get it on the projector, and yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think I said I was certainly intending to acknowledge that work had been done on this already, and that all that was needed was, it sort of feels like it's just waiting for a push. And I hope the case that I've made today is, let's have that push, because there's other stuff that flows from that, which is interesting,
One thing, because when you and I were talking about this, the one thing that did give me, and I'll use the term quite crudely, a warm, tingly feeling, was the fact that the reason we blame each other or shout at each other or have a go at each other is usually because of bottlenecks, or we're not experiencing people taking on work the way they should do. The beauty of this process is what happens is you all stand side by side and look at the work. So you're not blaming the individual, you're witnessing where there is a breakdown in the system. And not only that, is by getting a position like that, is you actually start looking at where the bottlenecks are, seeing how you can help if you've got time, learning about how that person does it and works in that area. So when it comes to holidays or someone's ill, you've actually got an understanding of their process. So that gap becomes easier to close when someone goes away on holiday or someone's ill or someone's away from work. And that's, for me, was the biggest and most important part of this process.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to that thing of, surface issues and shadow problems. If the workflow, are people familiar with the fundamental attribution bias? Fundamental attribution bias is a thing that says when errors occur, we're much more likely to blame people for those errors than we are to blame the system in which they operate. We're much more likely to do that than, so we're skewed to blame people. The reality is that the best solutions are often implemented at a system-wide level. The classic examples are airplane cockpit design and operating theatre design. And interestingly, there's a direct link between those two, which is that it's the innovations in airplane cockpit design which were carried over to medicine and in surgical design. So it's things like where two medicines have a very similar name, then you don't store them next to each other, even if they would come next to each other alphabetically, or you put them in very different coloured packaging, or just things like this where you can design out the opportunity for error. And the reason for this is because the system is generally shadowed. We can't see it. So we say, I feel frustrated. It feels like people must not be pulling their weight because we're not doing the volume of work that we should do. That's the fundamental attribution bias. So saying, oh, the problem is people, and specifically other people, not working hard enough, rather than a system which might be introducing unnecessary friction such that people are putting in effort that's just spinning wheels because, you know, well, for one reason, like, it's not clearly defined what the output from one stage that becomes the input of the next stage is. So there's this sort of fuzzy piece of work where some people finish the output at this point, others finish at that point, you know, and then it creates, as Don says, this kind of like systematically driven tension. The suspense. Who could it be at the door? The postman.
So where are we at right now? So basically, you've got so you've got bits of work been done on visualization and some in other areas. I'm sorry to say, unfortunately I've lost track, so I'm just kind of want to know where are we at with what's happening with these particular components. What's the next thing, or what is the thing that we're going to do with these components now that needs to be done?
I don't have an answer to that question.
You may not have an answer, but
no.
a couple of people said some things, so
but
you want to know some more information. And
yes.
Yeah.
The next step is...
It's a biggie.
Yeah.
I get that.
The next step is to ask precisely that question and to come together to an answer which is, okay, there's some work here, we all kind of see that there's a piece of work, we understand the value of the work, we see it has various strands that interconnect, great, okay. Some people are doing some stuff on it, what do we do next? I think, let's say, over the course of the next week, let's have conversations about that. I have one-to-ones with various people, so I have the opportunity to do that. If I don't have a formal one-to-one with you already, come and grab me and talk to me about this, and then let's get a sense of where we are and how things are going to move forward. Thank you very much.